Good afternoon and welcome to Live Jazz New England. I'm your host, Pamela Hines, and my guest today is Dan Gabel with the Maids, Elise Roth, Sarah Callinan, Annie Kerins, and Cara Campanelli. Joining me on piano is Conway Campbell on bass, Bill Doyle on rhythm guitar, and Bob Maloney on drums. Hailed by the Boston Globe as the real deal, who looks and sounds like the 1940s, trombonist, bandleader, and educator Dan Gabel formed his first band in the 8th grade and currently leads several bands including Dan Gabel and the Abletones, the High Society Orchestra, and an 11-piece 1920s dance orchestra. He has recorded 4 CDs and serves as president and CEO of the American Big Band Preservation Society. He has toured internationally with the Glenn Miller, Tommy Dorsey, and Cab Calloway orchestras. Dan has a master's degree from New England Conservatory, and while at NEC, Gabel unearthed the entire music library of Vaughn Monroe, one of his favorite musicians. Though separated by 2 generations, his research into Monroe's life revealed many commonalities. With support from the NEC Jazz Department, Dan cataloged the collection and performed a master's thesis recital of Monroe's material. This caught the attention of the Monroe family as well as the Vaughn Monroe Appreciation Society. He has turned the Monroe Project into the Vaughn Monroe Show, a unique performance that transports audiences to 1949 to hear the original hits of this big band icon. The new Maids vocal group, dancers, a comedian, and skits from the Camel Caravan radio and TV show complete the show, and this will be performed at the Hanover Theater on Sunday, October 15th. Here is our first tune, "'Tis Autumn."
on the piano. Old Father Time checked so there'd be no doubt, called on the north wind to come on out, then cupped his hands so proudly to shout, la-di-da, ti-la-di-da, 'tis autumn. Hey, the trees say they're tired, born too much fruit, charmed on the wayside, there's no dispute. Then shedding leaves, they don't give a hoot, la-di-da, ti-la-di-da, 'tis autumn. Then the birds got together to chirp about the weather. After making their decision with birdie-like precision, turned about and formed a beeline to the south. My holding you close really is no crime. Ask the birds, the bees, and old Father Time. It's just to help the mercury climb. Oh, la-di-da, ti-la-di-da, 'tis autumn. Conway Campbell. My holding you close really is no crime. Ask the birds, the bees, and then ask old Father Time. It's just to help the mercury climb. La-di-da, ti-la-di-da, 'tis autumn. La-di-da, ti-la-di-da, 'tis autumn. Oh, la-di-da, ti-la-di-da, 'tis autumn. Thank you very much. That's a beautiful tune composed by Henry Nemo, and I've always really enjoyed that tune. I think it's appropriate. The season is upon us. The leaves are turning. The weather is getting cool. It's a balmy afternoon here in Worcester, and I'm delighted to be here on WICN with a lot of friends. And now, folks, you're listening to Dan Gabel. You're about to hear our brand new wonderful vocal group, and we like to call them the Maids, and they are making their way to the microphones here at the live WICN studio. We are presenting the music of Vaughn Monroe. Vaughn picked this tune with his lovely wife Marion as their wedding song. They danced to it at their senior prom. They were high school sweethearts, and that was in 1929. They were married his entire life until he passed away in 1973. And any time he would come into town, the members of the band told me that they would always play this tune when they got back together. And one other little anecdote for our listeners, the daughters have the bracelets, but he had two bracelets made. Vaughn Monroe wore one that said, "You were meant for me," and he had one made for his wife, which said, "You were meant for me, too." Here we go.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3.
You were meant for me.
Pretty baby.
I was meant for you.
I was meant to love you and hold you.
Nature patterned you, and when she was done, you were all the sweet things rolled up in one. You're like a plaintive melody,
Like a song in the twilight.
that never lets me For I'm content, the angels must have sent you, and they meant you just for me. Thank you so much. You were meant for me. What a wonderful tune. Composed many years ago, and that was actually from Singin' in the Rain by Nacio Herb Brown. Wrote some really wonderful tunes. We are playing from the original sheet music, as Pamela mentioned, that we have in our possession from the Vaughn Monroe Library. And I'm very blessed to be able to play this music. It has not been heard since Vaughn gave up the band in 1954 and then gave up singing altogether in 1968. And so we're very excited to be able to present this wonderful music here for you. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to play a tune composed by Sammy Kahn and Julie Stein, 1946, and Vaughn Monroe is the very first one to record this lovely tune. Again, seasonally appropriate. Here is The Things We Did Last Summer. Rides we would take, the moonlight on the lake, the way we danced and hummed our favorite song, the things we did last summer, I'll remember all winter long, the midway and the fun, the Cupid dolls we won,
the bell you rang to prove that you were strong,
the things we did last summer, I'll remember all winter long, the early morning hikes, the rented tandem bikes, the lunches we used to pack.
We never could explain that sudden summer rain,
The looks we got when we got back. The leaves began to fade like promises we made. How could a love that seemed so right go wrong? The things we did last like promises we made. How could a love that seemed so right go wrong? The things we did last summer, I remember all winter long.
Keep playing one more.
Thank you so much. Beautiful tune. Sammy Cahn and Julie Stein. And they wrote so many wonderful tunes. Another number one hit we're not going to play today, but we are going to play as part of our tour is Let It Snow, Let It Snow, Let It Snow. That was the very first tune that Vaughn Monroe recorded of Sammy Cahn and Julie Stein's. They actually wrote it for him, and that went all the way to number one back in 1946. Quite something. We're going to do a Jimmy McHugh and Frank Lesser tune. It was a big hit much, much later on for several jazz musicians. This tune is generally associated in the jazz world, but it was a big pop hit for Monroe. His very first band, and this is the first tune that you hear the vocal group on. And you are listening, if you just tuned in, you're listening to Dan Gabel with the Vaughn Monroe Rhythm Section and the four wonderful singers that we call the Maids. And you're going to get that, hear them much more featured on this tune. This one's called Let's Get Lost. The party's rather dull, isn't it?
Yeah.
We'd love to steal away, wouldn't we?
Uh-huh.
But let's not even ask, should we or shouldn't we?
Well, should we? Huh?
Let's get lost,
With
lost in each other's arms.
That's true. Yeah. Let's get lost.
Then we can let them send out a alarm. And though they think us rather rude, let's tell the world we're in that crazy mood. Let's defrost in a romantic mist.
Come on, let's get crossed off everybody else's list.
It would be fun to celebrate this night. We found each other. Let's get lost.
Let's get lost.
Let's celebrate this night. We found each other. Let's get lost.
Let's get lost.
Oh, let's get lost. Thank you. Thank you very much. You know, normally we have 24 musicians up here with us, so the arrangements are missing a few horn parts. That's okay. We have 4 wonderful trumpets, 5 saxophones, 4 trombones, 4 rhythm, 4 singers, and 2 dancers as part of this incredible 24-piece orchestra. Did I do the math right? I think I got that right. 24 are on my list anyway.
So we just want to remind our listeners, yes, you are tuned into Live Jazz New England, and this is live radio. This is Pamela Hines, and my guests today are Dan Gabel, and then the Moon Maids, which is a tribute to the Vaughn Monroe show of 1949. And the Moon Maids 2017 are Elise Roth, Cara Callinan, Annie Kerins, and Cara Campanelli. Joining me on piano is Conway Campbell on bass, Bob Maloney on drums, and Bill Doyle is on rhythm guitar. It must have been a very exciting moment for you at New England Conservatory. Was the music in the basement where you found this Monroe material, or was it in the library somewhere in a closet?
It was really quite in disrepair, I would call it, in the basement underneath Jordan Hall. We see the splendor of Jordan Hall, certainly one of the best acoustic spaces that we have in New England. I feel very privileged to have been able to play on that stage, the same stage that Vaughn performed on when he was a student there. But I discovered this music in a dusty basement with rats and dripping water and all kinds of stuff. And, it took some convincing. The jazz department was always very supportive, but the library wasn't so much. But they came around, and I think they just didn't quite know what they had. And unfortunately, that's true of a lot of institutions, that they have these collections that get donated and nothing happens. And that's my little segue to the American Big Band Preservation Society. Amanda Carr started that, and that's why that was formed, because so many of these charts are just kind of laid to waste. So fortunately, the school's built a new library, and the new housings are going to be much better. But it was in disarray, and trying to catalog it was a bit of a challenge, and there were parts and envelopes and things misfiled and things missing. But eventually, fortunately, it all really was there, and it's really amazing. It's all the original music with the pencil markings and the notes, and it's
Great.
all there. All of it is there.
I think you're right. Talking about archiving now, it's people just don't even know what they have there anymore. And when they talk about archiving, are they putting it in an airtight, safe,
Right.
a place where it can be preserved? Like Boston University has a nice archive.
Yes, true.
Pretty decent.
Yep. I think the school's finally invested in that, which is good
Good.
to see.
You're going down to this musty basement, and you open up a box, and what's the chart that first peeks out at you?
The first one, I think it was All of Me, because it was technically, that drawer was alphabetical. And I said, I don't think he did that tune. And then I kind of dig into it, and then I realized now that they never recorded that arrangement. And then I start looking through, and I realized that so many of these charts were never recorded. He recorded mostly vocal tunes, and people wanted to hear him sing. He had a wonderful singing voice, but he was a trumpet player and a trombone player, and he really loved jazz primarily, and he thought of his band as a jazz orchestra. He loved Count Basie, and his instrumentals really show that, and so that's what I was most fascinated about. The first chart I see is an instrumental. It's not a vocal. I said, that's funny. I've never heard that. But he wasn't allowed to record those tunes. The RCA Victor executives wanted to hear those vocal tunes, and ultimately the public did too, but the guys in the band, especially their leader, knew that he had really wonderful talent in the band. He wanted to showcase that through those instrumentals. So I think that's part of the reason why I really love this music too, is that it's a nice mix of sort of pop instrumentals. We just played some Great American Songbook tunes that he did, but there's some really wonderful swinging jazz instrumentals by great writers too.
What year did he attend New England Conservatory?
He was there. He first attended Carnegie Mellon, was Carnegie Tech back then. He was a smart guy, chemistry major, and he dropped out because it was the Great Depression. And then he got a job with a touring band, Austin Wiley, and then he got a job with Larry Funk and his band of 1,000 medleys.
Jeepers.
Any Larry Funk fans out there? Didn't think so.
Well, that's someone else to investigate.
Yeah,
right
exactly.
there.
That's right. But the good news is the funk band brought him, not Funk the Style, but Funk the Man, brought him up to Boston, and he absolutely fell in love with New England and Boston and the area. And fortunately for us, he decided to settle there right away and enrolled in New England Conservatory in 1935. He only was there for 3.5. I don't think he quite completed his 4th semester. But it was a really tough time. 1936, the Depression, and he couldn't really get a lot of work as an opera singer. And so back then, the best job you could probably get is a trumpet player in a dance band. Those guys were still working. I like Richard Vaca's book. He's a friend of WICN, where he talks about those venues. And I love this line he says where even a half-decent musician could get steady work on Huntington Avenue in the 30s.
Wow.
So, and Vaughn was an excellent musician. So he was paid something like $50 a week back in the 30s. And factory workers, to give you perspective, were paid about $2 a week. So he was making a very good salary. So we see why he sort of dropped out. I've always loved his music. Of course, I love big band music in general. But I was drawn to the sound of Vaughn Monroe because we have a lot of similarities in our story, I think, if I may be so bold. Trumpet and trombone, we play those instruments, band leaders. Grew up singing in church, grew up a family, same type of upbringing, I think, and other similarities, left-handed. And the more I dug into it, the more I realized, wow, I'm kind of similar to this guy. That's interesting. And then I just was searching his name one day and found music at New England Conservatory, and I said, wait a minute, I go to that school. And so that's when I started digging and found the music. And then when I learned more about the story is so interesting about him and his family and his wife. And the more I learn about that, the more I realize this story has to be told. And this music is so incredible, it needs to be heard by the public. So,
What is the story about him and his wife?
I think it's a wonderful story. It's a little sad, too. So they met in high school. He changed high schools quite a bit because his father was a rubber engineer. And at those times, he was finding a lot of work, but he moved where the work was, building tires for cars, which were new at that time. So he moved quite a bit, and he transferred to Jeanette High School his senior year. Can you imagine transferring your senior year to a new state, new school, all new friends? But very quickly he was accepted. He was a very popular guy. He was the captain of the football team. He was the president of the band. He started a jazz orchestra. He was an Eagle Scout, and he was voted the prom king. And he invited this woman, Marion Bachman, the famous Bachman family of Jeanette, to his prom. And so, fast forward 10 years, they hadn't seen each other. He's in town playing with a band, and he calls her up and he says, "Marion, I've always loved you. Will you marry me?"
Wow.
And she said, "Well, if you leave the band and come pick me up tonight, then I'll say yes." So he didn't do it that night, but he came back the next day and picked her up, and her parents were always big fans of the Monroes, who still lived in that town. And I got to visit the homestead, the Bachman homestead, and the general store. They rededicated their auditorium, the Jeanette High School, called Vaughn Monroe Memorial Auditorium, which is pretty neat.
That might be a typical dialogue line, too, between musician and person. Yeah, I have a gig tonight. I'll propose to you tomorrow.
Propose to you tomorrow.
Is it okay? Right. I've got a gig tonight.
But, and she understood, and she wasn't just a homebody. She earned an MBA and was working at a high-powered firm in Pittsburgh at that time. Jeanette was a suburb. So it was really amazing for a woman to have that degree and to have a really great job, especially during the Depression. So she gave that up and ran away with this crazy trumpet player to Boston. They bought a house. They were married on April 2nd, and the band opened at Seiler's 10 Acres on April 8th. It was all very much a whirlwind, but that's what their life was like. Their whole life was dedicated to the music, but also to their family. He had an airplane that he would fly back and forth between gigs to home when they had their two kids. He was able to see them all the time, which was really wonderful. And their relationship was very strong as a result. And she was the brains behind the operation. She ran the business. And I think that's really what led to his success, was that he had that businesswoman head behind him. And their whole life they spent together, and finally they get ready to retire. He has this last tour planned, doing single acts. He's in the last leg of that. He gets sick. That night he goes to the hospital. He needs surgery, and they botched it, and he passed away.
Oh my
right
gosh.
After they had uprooted and moved to Florida, getting ready to retire. And she never really forgave him for doing that. So as a result, she was really quite angry at him and wouldn't let the music out. She wouldn't let it be performed. She wouldn't give out the rights. There were plans for a movie. There were plans for a show and a musical and all these things, but she would never grant those rights. So as a result, the music kind of died with him, I think. And she passed away at age 102 just a few years ago. And you know, may she rest in peace, but now that she's gone, the music can get out there. And I think that's kind of sad, but I do hope that she's forgiven him now, you know. But it really is incredible music, and I think that's why so many people haven't heard of it.
Wow.
But I think it deserves to be heard.
I remember Temptation, listening to the
Yeah.
big band stations when I was in the 70s now, to hear him sing Temptation, but I didn't realize he had this great wealth of material. So I really, it's a real unique and necessary thing that you're doing here, you know, creating the show and then touring with it. I don't think you can put a value on children and young people hearing this music, you know, and doing the same thing that you did when you heard it and then I did when I heard, like, oh, that's the music. That's what I love right there. What is that? You know, that's Vaughn Monroe, or that's big band, that's, you know, Count Basie or whatever. I think that you're doing a great, great service just for everyone by performing this show. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. And the music is bigger than me, or it's bigger than any of us, and I think that's why it's going to succeed, because the music speaks for itself. It really does. It's incredible stuff.
So I want to ask about the Moon Maids, which are all artists in themselves. They
Yes,
are,
they
you know,
are.
performing around the area and around the country. But I guess we should get on to a little bit of music, and then we'll do another
Sure, let's
break a
play
little bit
something.
later.
Yeah, okay. Let's play Tangerine. That was a very popular tune for many people, but Vaughn Monroe recorded it first. How about that? Thank you. That's Tangerine. What a great tune. On the string bass, Mr. Conway Campbell, Jr. Mr. Bob Maloney on the drums. On the rhythm guitar, he's also the band manager, Mr. Bill Doyle. I should mention Bill is playing a 1938 Epiphone guitar, unamplified. What a sound. And of course, our hostess of the mostest, Miss Pamela Hines, on the piano. I'd like to invite Elise Roth up. She has a really great story about Vaughn Monroe's music, and then I'm going to have her sing a wonderful tune as she does.
Just like Dan, I went to New England Conservatory, but a year after him is when I started. I went for opera performance, which I'm definitely not using now. And my first semester there, when they were introducing all the upcoming concerts and programming for the year, the jazz department mentioned that they were having a concert that they would let the classical vocalists audition for. They had discovered the music of Vaughn Monroe, who had come to NEC to study as a bass baritone in the opera department, and were just going to let the classical vocalists audition for a spot in the concert to sing some of Vaughn Monroe's hits and sing on Jordan Hall stage with a full orchestra. So I had never heard of this guy, but I auditioned. I learned, the first piece I learned of his was My Devotion, which of course we'll be singing at the show, as it was the top wedding song in the 40s. And from then on, I have been singing with Dan's band for 4 years. He was in the trombone section of the jazz orchestra, and he said, I want that girl to sing with my band. And I said, okay. And that October 4th was my first gig with the Abletones, and then after that I sang on Jordan Hall stage with this amazing band backing me, and the feeling is unlike anything in the world. And I've been in love with it since. So if it weren't for Vaughn Monroe, I wouldn't be here at all.
Yeah. There'll be some changes made.
This one again?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we're going to play a tune that Vaughn actually recorded, and if you want to hear a sample of him playing trumpet, I originally thought it was Bobby Nichols on here, who's a great jazz trumpet player from Boston, but I found the music, and the part says Vaughn on it, so, well, I guess that means it's him. So if you want to hear a sample of his trumpet playing, you can hear this record, and we're going to give you a little bit of that right now. Here's There'll Be Some Changes Made.
2, 1.
In the sea. So from now on there's a change in me. My walk will be different, my talk and my name, and nothing about me is gonna be the same. I'm gonna change my way of living, and if that ain't enough, I'll even change the way I strut my stuff, 'cause nobody wants you when you're old and gray. No, there'll be some changes made today. There'll be some changes made. Oh, yes. Was a hit with me. One time you thrilled me, but it's plain to see you're not so ambitious as you used to be. Now there'll be some changes made. There'll be some changes made. My, my.
Thank you so much. That's Elise Roth on the vocals, and our featured vocalist, of course, on the Vaughn Monroe show. You're going to get to hear her sing that tune she mentioned, My Devotion, as well as many other tunes. One of them that I'm really looking forward to is this tune that she really likes, and she kind of forced me to play it. It's called Requestfully Yours. And in the show, we're going to ask for requests. We're going to play that tune, and what Vaughn used to do on his radio show is say, does anyone have any requests? And they would call in. So it was kind of a neat thing. We're going to be recreating some of that and also some commercials and all kinds of stuff. Now, I don't want to spoil it for you, but you really, really do yourself a treat and come out on October 15th to the Hanover Theater in Worcester. Beautiful theater. The space is just wonderful. They did such an incredible job restoring it there. And we are so looking forward to bringing our 24-piece show out there. I think I'd like to slow things down and play a wonderful tune that was from the album that Vaughn recorded in 1947 called On the Moonbeam. There's a real theme of moon in Vaughn's show. His theme tune was Racing with the Moon, of course. The vocal group, therefore, was called the Maids. And he did this album of all moon-themed tunes. So I'd like to play one of my favorites. It was the theme tune of the Hudson DeLange Orchestra in the 1930s, and Vaughn dressed it up in new clothes. We'd like to play a little combo swing version for you of Moonglow. You see, right?
You are tuned in to Live Jazz New England. This is live radio in this wonderful broadcast of Dan Gabel and the Moon Maids, which is a tribute to the Vaughn Monroe show of 1949. We have one more tune, but before we close, I'd like to thank Dan Gabel and the Moon Maids, Elise Roth, Sarah Callinan, Annie Kerins, Cara Campanelli, as well as Bill Doyle on rhythm guitar, and joining me on piano today are Conway Campbell on bass and Bob Maloney on drums. Thanks also to Brad Pierce of Starfleet Audio in Whitensville, Mass., and the Piano Mill of Rockland, Mass. This is Live Jazz New England on 90.5 WICN. You can hear the complete version of this tribute on October 15th at the Hanover Theater. So that's a 4 o'clock start, and that's on a Sunday. So do get your tickets now, and you're going to hear the entire show as a tribute to Vaughn Monroe in his material from 1949. Dan, what would you like to play to finish out the show?
Well, I think it's only appropriate we play one of Vaughn's biggest hits, of course a big hit for the Moon Maids as well. Here it is, There, I've Said It Again. I love you, there's nothing to hide. It's better than burning inside. I love you, no use to pretend. There, I said it again. I've said it, what more can I say? Believe me, there's no other way. I love you, I will to the end. There, I've said it again. I've tried to drum up a phrase that would sum up all that I feel for you. But what good are phrases? The thought that amazes is you love me, and it's heavenly. Forgive me for wanting you so. But one thing I want you to know, I've loved you since heaven knows when. There, I've said it again. Forgive me for wanting you so, but one thing I want you to know, I've loved you, I will to the end. There I go
This is Pamela Hines, and my guests today are Dan Gabel, Elise Roth, Sarah Callinan, Ann Kerins, and Cara Campanelli. And on bass, Conway Campbell, Bill Doyle on rhythm guitar, Bob Maloney on drums, I'm on piano, and this has been Live Jazz New England. Dan, let's tell the listeners one more time where they can hear the entire show.
Absolutely. You're going to hear the entire Vaughn Monroe show at the Hanover Theater in lovely downtown Worcester, Sunday, October 15th at 4 o'clock p.m. You can get your tickets from the Hanover Theater box office.
And thank you to our listeners, and thank you to our live audience, and we will send it now to Tom in the studio.